In this episode, we're going to be talking about Blender. So if you're getting into it, stay tuned. Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. I hope you guys are doing well. My name is Jose Vega if you're meeting for the first time, and in this channel I like to share my process as a professional digital artist, from tutorials, time lapses, and any other tips and tricks that I find along the way to help you guys as an artist. And recently I released a Blender Basics mini course where I take you from everything from the very beginning to create a final scene, and I talk to you about the UI, some basic modeling tools, texturing, lighting, and rendering as well. And I want to share with you guys for the next couple of weeks some of the more key portions of that whole tutorial. If you're interested in that tutorial, you can check it out at my store. But in today's episode, I'm actually going to be talking about just a very basic overview of the user interface in Blender. So I will show you some of where most of the things are inside Blender and where you can find it. All right, so let's check it out. All right, so here we are in Blender, and first thing you're gonna notice, if you're opening it for the first time, you won't have this figure here. Of course, you probably will have a cube and maybe a camera and a light. Feel free to delete that. I'll explain that in a second here. But if you're completely new to 3D or Blender, this is what's gonna be your viewport, your 3D world viewport. And what I want to explain to you sort of on this episode is sort of give you a general sense of sort of like where the majority of the stuff are, and what all these buttons do, and if you need to worry about it or not, and sort of give you like a general idea so you can sort of start playing around with the software. And so you notice here that I have this figure here. The reason I have that is because I do mostly environment work, and I like to have this as my default when I open it. So that way I can start constructing things, tables, walls, doors, whatever the environment is based on the scale of a human. And so that's why I have this. And the way I set it up, I just grab a OBJ of a person. I deleted everything else from the scene. And you can do this to your own Blender. You can set it up to start the way you want to. And so once you have it set up with everything that you have, which for me is just this figure here, you go to File, then you go to Defaults, and then Save Startup File. Once you click that, you're going to see this little window that pops up here, and then you click Save Startup File. That way, whatever it's in here, it's going to be every time you open Blender. Okay, so to move around in your mouse or in the world, you're going to use your mouse. I'm using my middle click to rotate, right? I'm scrolling on my middle click to zoom in and out. And I'm pressing Shift and middle mouse click to pan. Okay. Now there's a few things in terms of navigation that you can do. If you press Control Shift, you will also zoom in and out. Also, another thing is, for example, don't worry about all this stuff, but let's just say, for example, that you have multiple objects here, and let's create a cube here, right? And as you can see, my camera is sort of like rotating around the female figure, right? And if I try to rotate around this circle here that I have here, it's really not, right? So what I do is, if I select it, right now I select it, if I press the period or point in my numpad, it's gonna focus that camera into the object that I have selected. And now I'm gonna zoom out a little bit. Now it's rotating around that. Right, so I'm zooming out. And if I want that, it could be multiple objects. If I press the period point, then it's sort of like in the middle here. If I want the cube, press the period, it's gonna focus there. And then I can rotate around it. Okay, so that's just something very quick if you wanna navigate a little bit better here. Now, Blender has this thing with selections that I'm gonna show you here now. say I have multiple objects here. So if I select an object, and you're gonna see this little orange dot. That's what's called in Blender an origin, right? And because this was the last object that I had selected, you're gonna see it here. But if I select that object, you're gonna see this orange colored outline around it. That means, and this is very important, that means that this is the active object, right? If you select it, you're gonna see that the rest of them have this darker orange color around it. And this means that I do have them selected, so I'm moving them here. But the active object is the one that has the lighter orange color here, right? So this is very important because a lot of stuff that you're gonna see here on the panel when we get to it, for example, like modifiers and all that stuff, you will see the modifiers here only for the active object, right? So you might be thinking that, oh, maybe I have this one selected, or like I have this one selected, and I'm not seeing the modifiers, so I'm seeing something different. That just means that this is displaying the modifiers of the active object, the one that has the lighter color here. Okay, so that is very important. And so you can click and drag select multiple objects. If you control click or click and drag, you can deselect objects. And the other thing you're gonna see here in the world origin, it's a little circle with the dark cross, and that's what is called the cursor. And the cursor, it is used for, you can use it for multiple things. For example, every time you create an object, is gonna be created at the cursor, right? So if I create a UV sphere, it's gonna create it right there. If I move the cursor over here, also you can move it with pressing Shift and right clicking, right? I'm pressing Shift and right clicking. You can it will create the object there in the middle there, right? So this can be used for multiple things, but also to create objects at that point. If you want to bring it to the world origin here, back to the origin place, if you press Shift S, you're gonna have this pie menu here, and then you can put cursor to world origin. And a lot of these I use, like selection to cursor, selection to active, cursor to select, and all that. We can definitely use those. So, but if you want to bring that cursor into the world origin, we just gotta press here, and then it goes back in there. But we have options like, if I want the cursor to be here in the object, cursor to selected, puts it right there where the origin is. You could also do selection to cursor. So let's bring the cursor to the world origin here, and let's say I have this box over here, and I want to bring it here, and select it, Shift S, selection to cursor. I'll bring it right there, right? Also, let's say I have, let's make this box a little bit bigger. So let's say I have all these objects selected, and I want these box to be my active object. Right now it's this big box here. So I just gotta Shift click this one, and then it will become the active object. If I press Shift S and I do selection to active, that means that everything that's selected is gonna move it to the active object, which is this cube here. So this and this will move. And there's multiple uses, but that just gives you an idea of what that does. So as for navigation, you can again, I'm not gonna go way too deep in here. I really want to, for this couple episodes, I really just want to give you a general idea, because a lot of this stuff you're gonna learn as you use it and as you continue to play with it. But let's do, for example, this right here, you can click and drag, and then you will do the same things for navigation. You'll have these for your orientation and all that. Okay, so let's go back to the origin here. Let's just delete this. In Blender, if you want to delete, you can use delete, or if you press X, you will get this to delete it. You can also delete it with X or delete. But Blender, you're gonna notice that I have this main window here, right? And I have this window and this window. We're gonna call these panels. So panels, you can edit them, you can move them around, you can do whatever you want. Like, don't feel married to keep it the way it is, because you can move this however you want to, right? So for example, have this panel here, and you can change any panel to whatever panel you would like, right? So I don't have to have the viewport here. If I go to the top left of the panel, I'm gonna have got this icon here with the arrow, and it's gonna give me options for all these panels, right? So same thing here, same thing here, and I still get all the same. So this could be my 3D viewport, right? This could be my shader editor, and I get my shader here. You could have it however you want to. So you can change those by going through here and then moving them. But you also have these different workspaces, and these workspaces, they're sort of by default in Blender that will sort of give you a setup of a workspace depending on what you're doing. So this is like the normal layout one. If you're modeling here, sort of similar to the previous one, but let's go to texture and paint. Here you will get your image editor, your texture paint mode, and then all this stuff that is sort of related to that. If you go to animation, you get your timeline here, and the rest of the stuff. And the same way for rendering, compositing, and all this stuff for shading. You can find your textures here. You have the UV editor, your shader editor, and the model here. But again, all these are editable, so you can edit them as you want to. And the way you do that, let's go to modeling here. But let's go to shading here, so we get more windows here. You're gonna see that we have these dividers here, right? And if I hover over them, you're gonna see that I get this, and I can just click and drag and move them. So I can change their size. And I can change the panels for whatever I want as well. So you have a lot of freedom there. But also you can eliminate some of this. So let's just say I want this whole bottom one to be just one panel instead of two. If I hover over the middle part here, right? So instead of editing the size, I right click. I can go to join areas. And if I want to join my right to the left or left to the right, then I just pick one, click, and then this becomes one, right? If I wanted to add another panel here or area, I go to the in-between here, not the middle, but on the corner, and I click and drag. And then I created another panel here. And then this could be, I don't know, shader editor, timeline, right? That's my timeline. Then of course I can edit the panel size and stuff. If I don't want it, right click, join areas. They're one of them. And I could do the same thing here to right click and areas. One. I could do swap areas. It will just swap them. I rarely use that, but this will give you a lot of freedom to do and edit the workspaces as you see fit. And so in these spaces, go back to the modeling one here. You're gonna see some stuff at the top here. This first one deals with visibility and how you select things. So for example, you have mesh, curve, and all this stuff. And whenever you have a more complete scene, you gotta have more of these. So for example, you can turn on the visibility of the meshes, right? So you don't see any mesh. And if I had lights, you could do the same thing for lights and empties and all that. But also, you will have this sort of like arrow icon. This means if they're selectable or not. So if I click that and it's disabled there for matches, I won't be able to select any matches, right? So this becomes very useful if I have a lot of lights or empties and I'm trying to select stuff through them. If I have that off, then I won't have to worry about selecting them by mistake or moving them by mistake and that sort of thing. So you can do that there, but you can also do that on your layers. So I'm gonna bring this down a little bit here. This is my scenes collection tab here, and you're gonna see that I have the eyes here, the same ones that I have here. So this is visibility. So if I turn that off, I don't see it, but I could add some more stuff here that is pretty useful. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to here, and I don't want you to worry about the rest of the stuff, but this top here is the ones that I want you to sort of get through right now. And we're gonna enable this one, which is the selectable, which is the one that we looked at over here. And we're gonna do the disable in renders. So now we have 3 icons here. And as I start creating and I start adding stuff, so I'm just gonna add let's add a light. Let's add a mesh, my monkey, all that. I start getting things here, and I can start turning them on and off visibility wise, or if I don't want to select them. So if I don't want this light to be selectable, I can click that and I can still see it, but I just won't be able to select it. And this last one is if you're gonna actually see it in the render. So some things you want in the viewport, but you don't want them to be in the render. And that's where you sort of disable that and they won't pretty much render. So as you create more things, you have a little bit more control over it. In here as well, you're gonna see that by default you get a collection, and collection, I want you to take a look or think about it as a folder where you can collect and group things, right? So let's just say cylinder here. Here maybe we have another box. Don't worry about the stuff that I'm doing. We're gonna go through that in a second. But let's just say I want my simple geometry here to be in a collection, in a group. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna select it and I'm pressing shift, right? I have these 3 selected. I'm gonna press M, and M is gonna bring my collection options. I'm gonna go to new collection. And let's do primitive shapes. Okay. And now you're gonna see that I have another sort of like box archive graphic here. And that's where all my 3 objects are, right? And you're gonna see here that I have 3, and this is the symbol for meshes. And if I turn that off here, if I disable it or exclude it, you see I don't see it anymore. I could have the same option of not being selectable, so I don't select them or see them. But now I have them in a group, and I can organize it that way. You can also do that here. So for example, if I want to have this in a selection, you can right click, new collection. But I always like using the shortcut. I just press M, and then I just put it in a collection that already exists, like primitive shapes or collection, which is the default one, or just create a new one, and I can call it scale. And I know that that collection is my scale here. So the other option here, let's not take a look too much here, but you can play around. So navigate, you'll get rid of some of these options here so you don't see them. But if you want to, for example, like I come from Maya, and every time I'll click an object, let's say here, I will have my gizmo to actually like move it around and all that. But in Blender, I don't use that anymore. So I don't have that active, so I can just disable it. But that's where if you're used to that navigation part of it, you can enable it here. Now the other one, you're gonna see some options here. Let's zoom out, and here you can click off your axis if you want the XYZ, the floor, which is pretty much the grid, the origins if you don't want to see origins. But I usually leave this sort of by default because I can always turn it on and off as much as I want to, but usually leave it the way it is, so it's not a big issue. Now the other option here is the X-ray. Now the shortcut for this is Alt-Z, right? And the thing about this is, for example, if I go to edit mode, and we'll talk about edit mode later, but if I select here, you're gonna see that I look back towards the back, like it didn't select the ones in the back. So for me to be able to do that, for example, if I want to say I want to delete half of the face, if I go like this, it looks like I deselected half, but if I turn around, you'll see that I didn't select the ones in the back. So Alt-Z to go into the X-ray mode, and now I can select what's behind it. If I press X, it's gonna give me the options to delete. I'm gonna delete just the faces, and there we go. Now we go back to no X-ray, and then we see half of it. So this is to turn on X-ray mode. Here you have wireframe, solid mode, textures to see just the textures, and here you will see texture and lighting as well, like the actual render. All right, but that's it about the basics of some of the layers here that you will get, and some of these buttons here. Now for these other panels here, a lot of these ones, you're gonna see that they have some colors. A lot of these ones, so from here down, it's gonna depend on the object that you have selected, right? Let's make this selectable. So this is gonna change. The ones from here down, it's gonna change depending on the object. So modifiers, particle system, textures, and maps, and all that stuff. But from here up, it's all about your actual scene, right? So in here, it's about the tools that you have selected. So go to edit mode, for example, and we grab a bisect. You're gonna see that I get different options. If I go to bevel, I get different options. So this is gonna depend on the tool that I have selected. This is gonna be about my scene. This is where I choose my render engine. I most of the time use Eevee, which is probably the only one that we're gonna take a look at during these episodes. Cycle is pretty good, but it takes a longer time. You can deal with the sampling here, add options for the rendering like ambient occlusion, bloom, reflection, shadows, and all that stuff. But we'll dive into this later when we start rendering. And here we're gonna this is where you find like rendering options, so your size for the render, file type, all this other stuff. If you're doing animation, how many frames you want to render, you'll find that there. And here are your render passes. This is something that I use all the time. So you will enable which render passes you're gonna get on your renders. This is where you do that. This one I actually do not use a lot at all. But here you can, for example, you can set up your units, how you're gonna deal with the units in your scene. But once you set that up, you don't have to worry about it anymore. And these are your world settings, so you can change the color of the world. If you have volume, viewport display and all that stuff. But we'll dive into this when we get to texturing, because I deal with this in a separate space. And then, like I said before, from here down, it's gonna depend on the object. So this is gonna be your transformation for the object. So if I move the location, you're gonna see that it moves. Rotation, scale, all these other options like visibility and viewport displayed. But I barely go into this. These are modifiers. We're gonna dive into this way more later, but this is where you apply your modifiers to the object. And there's a lot of modifiers here that I use all the time, which we're gonna go through them. And then you got your particle properties when you do particles, physics, like class simulation is probably the one that I use the most, and collision. And then you got your constraints, object data. Don't use this too much except like auto smooth here and when we do vertex groups, which pretty much is like I select these, let's say these vertices, I could create this as a group and then I can apply things to just that group of vertices. So I think that's very useful for very specific things. And then your textures, this is where we're going to deal with textures here. So you can add new textures or materials, and then you can, attach maps to these. But we have another window where we can do that as well. But this is where you're going to get all your materials for that object. And this is where you're going to have all your maps for that object. So, displacement maps, your views, and all that stuff. Okay, so this is just like an overall view of these options here. But just remember, from here down is object base, and then from here up is scene base, right? Now, something important before we wrap this up is how you're gonna, Blender. It's not that it depends on it, but something very good about Blender is that you can get a lot of plugins that do really cool stuff, and you will probably end up with a few of them that you're gonna use all the time, right? So in the window here, you're gonna notice that there's this little arrow here, and you can have the option to click that, and then you'll get these menus, right? But the shortcut for that, which I use all the time instead of getting that, is N. So N will open that window, and that's almost true for a lot of the panels here. So for example, if I have shader editor, I have a N panel that I can use there. But in here, by default, you're gonna have item, tool, and view. All these other ones that you see here are plugins that I have, so don't worry about them. But here are things that you can also find on your properties here. So for example, if I go to item, if I move this here, it's the same one as if I go down here and I move here, right? Same thing with rotation scale and all that. For tool, it's the same one that I have here. And view is pretty much my view here. So right now I have a 50 millimeter focal length. If I change that to 19, I change that there. For clipping, for example, if I get too close to this model here, you're gonna see that, oh, that's weird, that I get that. So I can fix that with the clipping. So I'm gonna reduce that number to 0.01, and then I don't get that clipping. And the same way, if I really zoom out a lot, if I had like a bigger scene and I zoom out a lot, you're gonna start to see that some things disappear, and that's where you want to fix your end clipping here. And that's about. We're gonna take a look at lock camera to view here, because that's very important when you start setting up cameras. But that's not really relevant right now. So if I press N, I take that off and out of the way. And if I go to File, this is pretty standard, File, Edit, Render, Window, Help. But if I go to File here, and I go to, Edit, Preferences, here, you're gonna see, interface, things, viewport, all this stuff. But what I want to take a look at first is if we go to Key Map, and I think by default, this tab for Pie menu is off. If you have it off, let's have that on, because what that does is if I press tab, I'm gonna get this pie menu, is what they call a pie menu, right? And this is what's gonna take me to different modes in Blender, right? And you can also access this by going here, same ones, but instead of going all the way here, clicking and all this, if you just press tab. So for example, if I want to go to edit mode, which is the mode where I can edit this mesh, I can just click tab and to the right, and then I'm here, edit mode. If I want to sculpt or texture paint, I have all these options, but most of the time I go to edit mode, between edit mode and object mode. And then now I can, select vertices, move them around, stuff, right? If I want to go back to object mode, which is out of edit mode, tap again, object mode, normal. So this pie menu it saves a lot of time to go back and forth in between modes. And so for example, for another thing that is very you probably might have to get used to if you don't have these, if you don't have the gizmo here, is how to move, rotate, and scale an object. So if we let's get rid of everything here. Actually, I'm pressing X and delete. Let's get rid of this light as well. Select it, right? So to create something, you can go to Shift A. I'm gonna dive into this in the modeling episode, but I'm just gonna create here a simple cube here. I didn't have the gizmo when I selected this gizmo where I can, move it or rotate it or scale it. If I want to move, I'll press G. I just press G once, and then I sort of get into move mode. And so if I move my mouse, it's gonna move the object, right? It doesn't matter where the mouse is. As soon as I press G, it's gonna move the object, right? I'm into move mode. If I press R, then it's gonna rotate it, right? If I press S for scaling, then it's gonna scale it. Okay, so now the thing is, I'm gonna get rid of this gizmo here. See it? Now, if I try to move it, for example, if I want to move it to the right here, went to the right, it didn't really move it along that axis, right? Wanted to move it straight to the right. So it's going to be really hard to sort of eyeball that and move it. But what I like to do is, if I'm not going to move it to the right along that axis, which is the X axis, the red one, I press G to move, and then X. And X means that it's going to just move it in that axis, right? So now it doesn't matter what I do with my mouse, it's always going to move it in that axis. Same thing for the Y axis. So I press G to move, Y for the axis. Now I moved it. And the same way for the Z axis, which is up and down. G for move, right? And this applies to scaling and rotating. So if I want to stretch this box and make it longer in the X axis, I press S for scaling and then X, and scales it up that way. So one thing to notice is if you see the origin, which is here, you're gonna see that if I press S for scaling and press X, the closer I am to the origin when I do this, the more incremental this happens, right? So you see I'm moving it just a little bit and it's getting bigger by a lot. But look what happens if I do the same thing, but the mouse is further away from the origin. So the same thing, scale, S, and then X for the axis. And now I'm moving quite a lot the mouse, but it's scaling in a lower or smaller increment, right? So pay attention to where the mouse is when you do their G for move, R for rotate, and S for scaling. So the closer I'm at to the origin, the bigger the increments. to see how much that increments, because I'm closer to the origin. I'm further away and I press S, it's more controllable. So just keep that in mind. And it's something to get used to, but you can do that. Now, for if you're having trouble with increments, like for example, you just want to do it just a little bit, and this goes, this applies also for, like, let's add a modifier here real quick. Not decimate. Actually, we can do it here. This applies also for these sort of like bars of settings that I press S and I just want it to move just a little bit, or I just want to go into X here. And let's say I want to match this line into this. I press G for moving. If I press Shift as I'm moving it, you're gonna see that it's moving with less increments. So pressing Shift will reduce the increments of anything that you're doing. So for example, if I want to scale this on the X Y axis here, okay, and I have this like this. If I press Shift as I'm doing it, the increments are smaller. It's easier to move. Just keep that in mind. Pressing Shift will give you a little bit more control when clicking and dragging in settings like these. All right, let's delete that. Okay, and so the last thing will be go to Edit here. Again, Preferences. We took a look at the tab for Pie menu. If we go to Add-ons, which is something where you're gonna be going a lot if you're gonna get into add-ons, this is where you're gonna install them pretty much. And you're usually gonna install a zip file. So if you downloaded or bought a add-on that you want to install into Blender, this is where you're gonna go. You're gonna go to install, you're gonna find the file, the zip file, and then select it, and then you're gonna enable it. So you're gonna see that it's gonna be like sort of grayed out. So just gotta enable it, and then it will be enabled in your Blender file, right? So that's how you're gonna add your add-ons to Blender. And I already have quite a few. One of the most important ones that I use most of the time that are free is import images as planes, which is pretty default by Blender. And Node Wrangler. We're gonna take a look at this on the texturing episode, but Node Wrangler is super important. And images as planes is very important. And a lot of these are ones that I bought, but as you learn it, you're gonna get the ones that you're gonna use the most. Right? So again, this is sort of like an overview of the very basic stuff. You know, all this stuff you can just play around with and sort of explore by yourself. But that's sort of like a basic introduction to sort of like the basics in Blender. All right, guys, so that was it for today's episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any comments or questions, let me know in the comment section below so I can actually address them. If not, I'll see you guys in the next one.